Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome back to the course titled Strategic Communication for Sustainable Development. My name is Aradhana Malik and I am helping you with the course. And in the previous class we discussed Steyn and Puth's model for developing corporate communication strategy, and we discussed, in brief, I tried to give you an idea of how that model would apply to development situations. Now Bigel in his paper has described a simplified model of communication strategy for the development sector, and that is what we'll be discussing in this very brief snippet right now. Okay, so he discusses application of the Steyn and Puth model, and he says that as opposed to the first step in the original model proposed by Steyn and Puth, which was analysis of the organization's or institution's internal environment, here we identify the emerging issues in the community. We identify these issues through regular formal feedback process in the community. Feedback, we institute some feedback mechanisms, we analyze the issues and risks, and we try and find out what is going on in the community. The second step here would be emerging strategy. We find out what kind of strategy emerges as a result of this identification, leading to the identification of stakeholders. So this also feeds into the identification of stakeholders, and this would have the impact on enterprise strategy and response to emerging issues and risks. So how do you manage risks and issues, and how do you manage relationships, which would give us an idea of how we respond to emerging issues and risks, and the impact these risks would have on the enterprise strategy, and that would help us identify the emerging strategy and the emerging risks and issues. Okay, and that would in turn help us identify the stakeholders, the people who are being affected by these risks and these issues. Then this leads to designing the enterprise or organizational strategy, or a strategy for the community, which would be the implications of the enterprise strategy for communication management in that situation, which would be a product of our values and how do we want to be perceived by the stakeholders. So how do we want our stakeholders to perceive the people who are trying to do something for the community, who are trying to design a strategy for the community. Okay, this in turn leads to identification of stakeholders. And who are the stakeholders? We identify the people whose impact is the most on the organization or the community. Specific contact persons, the actual people who do the work in the community, who can be contacted, who will take the message forward, who will do something for the community, who will get heard, and who will do the work. These are the people who needs to be identified, and who is going to be affected by it, who will speak for them, who will they allow to speak for them. That is what we mean by this. Then we determine the needs and expectations of the stakeholders from direct and indirect engagement with the stakeholders. So we go and talk to them, and we also observe them, and we become a part of the community and we observe what is going on. Okay, and then once we have identified their needs and expectations, then we assess the organizational goals and risks versus stakeholders' needs and expectations. What can we do? What should we do? How much of a risk it will be for the community, for the people who are trying to go in and do something, and the implications of communication or implications for communication and relationship management. We find out what issues the community is facing and what kind of implications do these issues have for us as people who are trying to go in and do something for the community. What implications do the needs and expectations of the stakeholders have for the community itself, for the relationship between different members of the community, for management of the relationship between the different members of the community and people who are trying to do something for the community. Okay, prioritization of risks, stakeholders and stakeholder issues will help us assess organizational goals and risks, and in connection with the needs and expectations of the stakeholders. So what the community wants, what the stakeholders want, how do these two come together, how do they relate together, what are the risks, what are the issues, how do people interact with each other despite these issues. For example, let's take the example of a borewell in the village. So we say it's very far away. Now who gets to get the maximum benefit from that borewell, who gets to, so a power structure may be created because of the location of the borewell in the village, and then how do we, is that power structure really required for the community? Can we dissolve it? Will we be able to dissolve it? Will we be able to mitigate the harmful effects of having the borewell in a specific location versus in the center of the village where everybody has access to it? So it's not only a function of the physical fairness, it's also a function, where the borewell is dug is a function of the geological capacity of that area to have water. The geologists can only come and tell you where to dig, where you'll be able to find the maximum amount of water, who lives around that area, who gets to use it. So all of these have implications for the community. And if we tell people, no, you must take turns, how will it affect the social fabric of that region? So all of those things need to be assessed. Okay. Overarching communication strategy, after we found out what the needs of the community are, what the risks, what kind of risks they are facing, what kinds of issues they are dealing with, then we discuss we formulate the overarching communication strategy. We set strategic relationship building goals and objectives. It's all about relationships, it's all about the community, it's all about who connects to whom and how and why and when. And then we decide what should be achieved and why, what should we focus on, what are the measurable objectives in that situation, and we form a matrix between the stakeholders and the issues. So what kind of relationships do they want and what kind of issues they are dealing with, and we map these, and then we decide the measurable objectives. Then we come up with an implementation plan. How should we achieve the relationship building goals and objectives? What should be done by whom, and who will allow whom to do what? And then we implement things. First we set up the plan, then we implement things, including listening to stakeholders. We need to listen to the people who we are doing all this for, confirm the strategy, and provide feedback to the existing overarching communication strategy. We provide feedback to the next round of the identification of emerging issues. So everything is cyclical. We take the stakeholders' interests, risks, issues, relationships into account while planning anything. Okay? And that is how we design the communication strategy for the development sector. And that is where this very brief lecture will end, and we will take it from here in the next class. Thank you very much for listening.